Free socks.
Test 1, 2, 3, test 1, 2, 3. We're good to go.
Welcome to Snooze. Brand new show, first episode. Familiar faces for some of you who have watched our content before. Thomas and Wac here. Thomas, how does it feel to be back on air?
Hey, I'm excited. I know we have a lot of sports to talk about, and I'm excited to just launch another program with you.
Yeah, and this is kind of an interesting concept. We were like, well, what do we call this show, and what do we want to talk about? And you know, we're only going to be on once a week, at least for now. And so I was like, well, what can we, you know, we obviously want to talk about some of the sports news that, you know, is up there on a Monday. And I was like, well, you know, Monday, people are kind of getting over that kind of weekend lull, and they trying to wake up still. It's like sports news, and then it's like snooze. It's perfect. The story writes itself, if you will. So snooze is all about getting you out of that weekend funk and back into the groove of the weekday grind, and so we're gonna give you some of that. And one of the things we're gonna do to always start the show is give you some stuff that you may have been sleeping on, entertainment wise, just life wise, whatever that may be. Some things that you need to check out. Thomas, let's start with you. What have people been sleeping on lately?
I'm going to say the fact that we actually had some live sports over the weekend. They weren't major, or one was not a major event. One was actually a regularly scheduled sporting event. Obviously, there was a NASCAR race at Darlington. Obviously, that's a major track on that circuit. And then there was actually a charity event involving a couple PGA players called the TaylorMade Driving Relief. So that was cool to see some live sports. Obviously, you know, we're still kind of getting back into that sports groove, and you know, it was just great to see some live sports action for a couple hours.
Yeah, and I think we'll get into that here in a minute as well. When it comes to me, something that people may have been sleeping on, I know it's still a very popular show 20 years in. Survivor just got done wrapping up its 40th season. Now, of course, they do two seasons a year, but still, season 40 was an all-winner season. So, spoiler alert, I'm not going to spoil who won in case maybe you're going to be watching it or you want to watch it. But a great season. Probably not going to be a Survivor in the fall with the coronavirus situation, but still excited. And if you have not been watching Survivor, it's on Amazon Prime. Go check it out. Just great stuff. And you've definitely probably been sleeping on that if you haven't been watching Survivor lately. Thomas, do you watch Survivor?
I don't. I've never seen a single episode.
Not a single man. If you like reality TV, and it's a good fun show. Not a lot of, I don't know. There's a lot of reality TV that's like all drama filled and like, you know, all that stuff. This is probably one of my favorite reality shows, and I've been watching it since season 1.
Oh wow!
Go check it out, Thomas. Definitely love it. I'll probably be watching some old episodes while I edit this afterwards. But
sounds like you're a dedicated fan, Josh.
I'm definitely dedicated. Would love to be on the show, but it's hard to get through that audition process and all that.
I think
so
you and I have the look for Survivor, though, with our beards and everything.
Hey, you know, I got the beards. I got some tattoos. My story writes itself, you know.
Oh yeah, you do have the tats. Actually, you probably fit in even better than me.
Well, I mean, you know, maybe one day they'll let me on and I can win, and wouldn't that be awesome? But moving on, let's go ahead and talk about some sports news, because that's what snooze stands for, is sports news. And man, we've got a lot of sports news to cover. Like you mentioned, there were some sports this weekend. NASCAR came back, golf was back. And of course, yes, it wasn't live sports, but then the last 2 episodes of The Last Dance. So, you know, it's weird to say a very busy weekend of sports, but, you know, it was pretty jam-packed with some sports. Thomas, are we getting back to a little bit of normal here?
I think we are a little bit. I mean, obviously with NASCAR, that's a big return. Obviously, I know UFC started to have some events the last couple of weeks, and Actually, when I was watching a little bit of that golf event yesterday, they were saying that the PGA Tour is supposed to return in a couple weeks. So, it's great to see these major sports leagues start to return, because I think before we know it, we're going to start seeing all these sports that we love.
Yeah, one of the sports that's starting to come back, or talk about coming back, obviously, is baseball. A lot of things that need to be worked out still. But one of the key issues that we've seen pop up with this is, there's a player and owner disagreement about money for the 2020 season. Do the players get all their money? Do they get some prorated amounts for only the games they play? Obviously, the owners don't want to pay for a full season that's not happening. The players want that money. Who do you side with in this debate, Thomas?
I actually side with the owners on this one because, like you pointed out, it's not going to be a full season. And really, everyone, whether you're a professional athlete or just a normal person, everyone's had to adjust the last couple months to this COVID-19 situation. And, we've all had to make sacrifices, and, we're all going to have to, adjust to the new time. And I think the ability for players to kind of help with this period of time where a lot of people are suffering, whether it's financially or obviously they were greatly affected by COVID-19. I think the ability for these players to hit the field, or, obviously in other sports cases like basketball, the court, if you're able to start seeing these actions on the field, I think people are going to start, kind of refocusing their attention on the sports they love, the teams they love, the athletes they love. And, if the athletes are able to cut or agree to that 50-50 split that the owners are trying to propose to them right now, obviously, there's not going to be, likely, any fans in the stands this season. Obviously, that's going to affect not only ticket sales, but concessions and food and all that. And I think, if really, in my opinion, these baseball players need to understand that, hey, we're not going to get 162 games this season. And, let's do the 50-50 split. We don't know, what MLB is going to be making this year. Obviously, there will be a condensed revenue that the league's going to make, the owners are going to make, the players are going to make, and I've seen that if MLB doesn't have even a shortened season, they could lose billions of dollars. And then obviously, I've also seen that if owners pay these players either a full salary or something that is like they're defining prorated, basically these teams and these owners would lose about, the teams would lose hundreds of millions of dollars. So the owners are losing potentially billions, and obviously the teams are losing hundreds of millions. That's going to affect MLB for years to come if the players dictate that, hey, like, we're only going to hit the field this season if we go on a full salary.
Yeah, I mean, it is tough. I mean, on one end, you're like, oh, instead of getting 8 million, you get like 4 million or something. And then, for like you're saying, for those, there's people out there that are making far, far less out there right now than that. And so it's like, do you really complain? But at the same time, obviously, is it fair? There's a lot of stuff that needs to be considered along this, and I don't think it's going to be an easy, quick solution just to say, unless the 50-50, rev share is the solution. But I don't think it's going to be one thing where you look at it and be like, there's a simple, easy fix. I think there's going to have to be compromises on both sides when you really get down to it. I do think it'll be worked out. Maybe you have one or two, maybe a handful of maybe superstars sit out and protest or something. But I think at the end of the day, there'll be some type of solution worked out that will be beneficial to all. And what I mean by beneficial is beneficial in that all things considered, it's beneficial. So I do think, at the end and it'll be interesting to see, because I'm pretty sure, the NBA might follow suit in that regard, so it'll be interesting to see kind of the MLB, I guess, whichever comes back first will kind of be maybe the starting point for the other leagues that might want to finish their season on how they'll do that. Don't you think?
Well, and I mean, I've seen, and I don't think there's been a study yet per se from MLB. Maybe there was, and I missed it. But I know that the NBA did reach out to most of their players, and it sounded like the vast majority of them wanted to finish the 2019-2020 season. And to me, that's a great sign. I mean, it definitely shows that, the players are at least potentially willing to, work with the owners if there is any type of disagreement, because obviously they haven't been playing since March. And so maybe, their money's been affected. I mean, the thing is, it's not just dependent on, the fans, because, like, really, I mean, any professional athlete, in my mind, deserves a role in helping their communities get through times like this. And, obviously, you have all the stadium workers, arena workers, all these people that are, used to, going into work and getting paid. Now, there have been some great owners that have, been paying their stadium employees during this time, even though they've not been able to go into their respective works usually. And so that's a great sign. But I do think that, like you said, there has to be some negotiating with, both sides, especially with baseball, because I think they're further apart than NBA is. It sounds like NBA, if there is any type of little disagreements, they're willing to work through that. I think baseball potentially might be a little bit further away from returning to action. So there may be an opportunity for NBA to get back in action in the next couple of weeks if things continue to improve. Obviously, I know this week you're starting to see gyms open up in Texas. That's obviously going to affect the Spurs, Rockets, Mavs. There's some other states that have had similar patterns as well. So, maybe in a month or so, you start seeing NBA basketball again, and that'd be great.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see what happens with the pro level again. I think that's going to really be. I don't know about all levels of sports, but it's definitely going to be interesting to see what that looks like, because I think what happens with the pros in the NBA and then MLB will translate to all the other pro levels. Obviously, I think they're getting tested more and stuff like that, so it will be interesting to see what happens. Moving down a couple of levels, let's talk about some high school. As you know, if you've been listening to us on our old podcasts, we're big high school guys. We cover a lot of high school sports. So the Louisiana High School Association, they plan to start their summer workouts June 8th. How do you think this will affect the return of Texas high school activities?
I think it's going to affect the UIL's decision, and obviously subsequently the TAPS and TAPS, as we see some other smaller high school athletic associations and extracurricular associations in Texas, because obviously New Orleans was hit dramatically by COVID-19, and actually I was looking at the numbers in terms of deaths. Louisiana's had a far more amount of deaths from COVID-19 than Texas has. I believe it's about 1,100 more than Texas has. And, if you think about the populations that both states have, obviously Texas is not only spread out more, but it's also, there's a lot larger population in Texas than Louisiana, and they haven't had nearly as many deaths from this disease or this virus as Louisiana has. So I think this is definitely a great sign if you are a big high school sports fan in Texas, because I think with them being so close, there's going to be definitely a lot of looks over there at how that transition back to not only just summer practices, but then obviously taking the further steps to ultimately, resume athletic competition for the school year ahead. Because I think once you get these groups of athletes at these high schools together, I believe in Louisiana they said groups of 25 for these high school athletic summer workouts can be about 25 people. That's a good improvement, and I think Texas is definitely going to look at this really wisely, and it'd be a good idea as well to maybe talk to some of those officials in Louisiana, if you are from the UIL, TAPS, SVC especially, about what ignited this decision, because originally this association in Louisiana was trying to get workouts started, I believe this week or next week, and it ended up having to get pushed back to June 8th. So my guess is, they were just trying to, give themselves a little bit more of a buffer, especially with the outbreaks that they've had, especially in New Orleans. I know New Orleans has been hit dramatically by COVID-19. So I'm excited to see, and I do believe that once you start seeing the dates get closer to that, probably Texas is going to look at that really, really close about returning soon after that.
Yeah, well, while I think that they'll definitely pay attention to what other states do and how it works out, personally, I feel like graduations are going to be what some of these UIL TAPs is going to be looking at. Obviously, we know a lot of schools are allowing graduations in stadiums, obviously at a reduced rate for attendees, but I think that's where people are going to be looking. Okay, these schools, they're letting in people. What's going to happen with the outbreak level at these certain locations a couple of weeks after these graduations? I think that's probably going to be, in my opinion, where UIL starts looking, right? So you're going to have all these students graduating. You're going to have all these parents in stands. What's going to happen without, the level of outbreak after that? So I think that's where they're going to be turning to and looking to see, one, if it's feasible to have sporting events, and two, are they going to allow people to be in the stands during these sporting events? What do you think on that?
No, I mean, I think that's a major role in not only setting up the next season of sports, especially in Texas, but obviously all these summer workouts that are a potential as well, because you want to be working towards something. If you just are like, hey, these guys can just work out, but we're not necessarily saying that that's going to affect the possible return around the normal time for especially the fall sports. I think the spring sports, they have a little bit more of a timetable to obviously start on time, because we're all keeping an eye on this virus, and we're all trying to find a way to take it down. But I mean, do you want to play a season without parents in the stands, family members, band members, other people in the community, just people that came in for a big matchup from out of town? I mean, that's the thing that, I get. Those are all major contributors in kind of that high school sports atmosphere that we all love, and, is obviously well known around the country. I mean, imagine if, they decide to do a high school football season without fans in the stands. I mean, it would not be anywhere near what you usually expect. And so, yeah, I mean, you got to obviously take all that into consideration. And I'm really curious to see, if things get better and better, how these openings of, these communities and businesses and other areas are going to influence what happens, especially with volleyball and football, which are the two big team sports in the fall. Are we going to see fans in the stands, band members, obviously those other people I mentioned in the community a few minutes ago, or is it going to be something where, hey, we'll do it on a test basis? Maybe we let half the people that we normally let in the stadium, or maybe it's a quarter. I mean, to me it's probably gonna be really dependent on these local governments and communities, because I know some places I've been, they're already allowing these vast reopenings, whether it's 50% full capacity in restaurants, or obviously there's other places where especially in Texas, if you're up in Dallas or Houston area, you're kind of still in a stay-at-home order. And so to me, it's probably going to be from one community to the next, depending on how they were affected by this virus, and obviously how many people have recovered that were obviously affected by it.
Yeah, I mean, moving on to the college level, I think college is going to be a lot. If college football happens, it's going to be pretty crazy. I mean, the California university system, as Ray said, basically most of their classes, if not all of them, I can't remember, it's one or the other, is going to be online in the fall, which could impact, obviously, fall sports for these universities, hence football. Will football happen basically in the state of California in the fall? And so with that, there could potentially be a lot of scrambling, teams readjusting schedules and whatnot. One thing that could potentially happen is that the conference, and this has been talked about in the past, but obviously now with the coronavirus, the situation's coming up again, is that does Conference USA and Sun Belt, do they kind of group together and form kind of one conference and two or three geographic conferences? If they did that, how would you break them up, Thomas?
There's actually a pretty good divide, and I do like the idea because there are some regional rivalries that would be renewed. Like obviously, you got UTSA and Texas State, longtime rivals when they were back in the Southland Conference, and actually, there's a pretty good divide. You can do a 12-team division, 12-team conference, one division, all Texas schools, and then obviously another division inside this first conference that's more kind of Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, and then the other conference could be about 14 members, and you basically can have everybody throughout the Southeast, everyone from Alabama, Kentucky, Tennessee, all the way up to West Virginia. Obviously, I'm not talking about those SEC schools. I'm talking about schools from those states. I know there's a couple reps in Florida as well that you can kind of break up into two 7-team divisions inside a 14-team conference. And, I mean, to me, it makes really a lot of sense, especially with, a lot of schools coming out in recent weeks saying that, they're going to be dropping, notable athletic programs. And, when you're having to travel, 1,500 to 2,000 miles for a conference game, to me, it makes a lot of sense when these two conferences, have such overlap to just kind of, in a sense, merge and then like break up into 2 to 3 more geographic conferences. I think 2 is probably more realistic than 3. You could do 3 of 8, but there's not really a lot of 8-team conferences like there used to be back, decades back. And so to me, the model right now is kind of be at that 10 to 14 team model. And I think if you have 2, conferences, one at 10, one at 14. Now the interesting thing is, actually I mentioned it before, I need to clarify. So in that kind of more Western conference, 2 of the schools are non-football full members, and so for football you'd have 10 members. I know in the Sun Belt, which they have 10 football playing members right now, they do have 2 football divisions within inside their conference, and so you could still break it up east to west. There's a good divide that actually, there's one team in Texas, UT Arlington, that would obviously add on to that Texas division, if you want to call it that. And then there's another one that's kind of more Mississippi River division, if you want to call it that, that is also a non-football full-time member. So, obviously there's 14 full-time members in my mind in that kind of more Eastern Conference. They all play football, so that's not the confusion part. But in that Western Conference, you would have 2 even divisions with and without football. And I just think there's a good, idea moving forward to not only resume, very local and historic rivalries, but also just, make it more feasible economically for these athletic departments where they don't feel like they have to, drop significant numbers of athletic programs for their student athletes to come.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see what schools ultimately decide to do once we obviously know more about the situation into the summer as fall approaches. But I do like your idea. I think that's a good one. And, well, I guess not your idea, but your solution to the idea, I guess you could say. But it'll be interesting to see what happens, like I said, as we get closer to the fall season. Finally, for our show today, I know we talked about NBA briefly when we were talking about the MLB stuff, but obviously it sounds like players want to finish the season. They've been meeting. I know there was a big conference call with Adam Silver earlier last week. Do you think that they're going to actually finish the campaign, or do you think they'll just say, hey, you know what, rest up and let's get ready to go for 2020, 2021?
No, I think there's going to be a great push to resume, and I think ultimately they will find a way to do it. Because
do you think they jump right into playoffs?
The players want to return to court and finish out. They played probably 4/5 of the regular season, and they want that final, chunk of the season because they feel like it would have been different if they would have played maybe a fifth of the season, but man, they came so far, and there were some great teams, and they were hungry for a championship. I think they're going to find a way to play out this season.
If they do, who you think pulls it out?
Man, that's tough. My guess is it's probably going to be one of the LA teams versus Milwaukee for the final.
Yeah, and it will be interesting if it comes back. I mean, obviously, you've had going on 3 months, or I guess 2 months now since basketball has ended. What's that going to do as far, obviously some players have been practicing, because they got gyms in their homes. Some players don't. What's that going to look like? Will we see some potential upsets because teams haven't gotten back into that groove? It will be interesting in those dynamics of, will there be a champion that you might not expect because some of these favorites have kind of cooled off, if you will, with the 2-month break. And along those lines, obviously, do you foresee the 2020-2021 season, if we get the end of this season, being pushed back slightly and maybe a slightly reduced schedule?
I definitely could see either a shortened season next year to kind of get back on track, or like you said, starting the season closer to Christmas. I think both are great possibilities. I don't see it starting on time if they're able to finish this season because, they still have probably 2 months minimally to play out, the rest of the regular season and ultimately the playoffs. Now, there may be some type of, redesign for the rest of this season to get, whatever criteria they feel like is necessary to fully finish this season and make it, the most, balanced without necessarily going the normal time you usually think of for, to get all the games in regular season, postseason. But I definitely think it's highly likely for this next season, 2020-2021, to not only get pushed back to either, Christmas time or maybe, January 1st, and then, maybe play a 50, 60, 75 game schedule instead of the normal 82.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we'll know more here, at least as far as the 2020 season, 2019-2020 season here in the next couple of weeks, I would assume. And then after that, obviously once that falls into place, then all the other stuff will start falling into place as well.
I do want to say one thing, and I know you were bringing up a second ago, the fact that there may be some teams, if they do resume the season, you might see a push from somebody. You might see a team that was kind of leading the charge that might struggle down the stretch if they resume this campaign. I know we've been talking about it for months now because you and I are both Spurs fans, but do you think the Spurs are in one of those positions to potentially make a move if they finish out this season and potentially clinch a playoff spot?
Well, I think that really all depends. On a couple of things, because I think they were 10th, 9th or 10th at least in the rankings when the season, was put on hold. It'd be if they jump right into the playoffs, that wouldn't happen. Which I don't think they would, because I think you're going to hear players saying, "Hey, we need at least a couple of weeks to get into the groove," and if that's the case, then I mean anything is possible. It's really who's going to come back and get that, because some teams start hot and then get cold, and some teams are opposite. So I mean it's definitely not impossible, but it really will come down to how many games. Let's say they don't jump right into playoffs. It really comes down to how many games they're going to allow before going into the playoffs, because I would have to pull it up here. I don't have it on me on hand, but I know there are a few games back of that 8th seed. So it really comes down to that. If I'm being honest with you.
Well, it's gonna be interesting to see, because I mean, I liked what you said about the players might really have a urgency to finish out the regular season before they start the postseason. If that happens, maybe you're able to have shorter playoff series to kind of wrap up this season. Maybe instead of 7-game series, you have 5-game series, or maybe you do 5-game series earlier on, and then maybe the finals are a 7-game series. I think you could see some possibility in terms of the length of these playoff series. Maybe even like a first round, you just do best of 3. Then maybe kind of gradually expand each series length, at least for this season. I like the normal 7-game series normally, but that might be a way for us to not have 3 months of NBA basketball going into late summer period, or potentially even maybe September.
Yeah, so the Spurs are actually currently the 12th seed in the West. And they're 5 games back of the 8th seed, so which is Memphis. So they would obviously basically have to win every game and hope Memphis really struggles. Because that's really it. Because the 7th seed has 40 wins, which is Dallas. Memphis has 32 wins, and San Antonio has 27. So their only hope would be passing Memphis, and so that would really, I think, if you're looking at obviously a reduced finish to the regular season, you would have to basically win every game and hope Memphis loses every game. And the teams in front of them, Sacramento, New Orleans, and Portland also struggle. So it would take a big effort for San Antonio if it were to restart on a regular season. Maybe a couple weeks worth of games. It would definitely take some type of miracle for them to make the playoffs. But then, I mean, who knows after that? So I would say the chance of them making it if restarted is very slim. But never say never, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we all remember what happened in the shortened season in '99. So maybe they have some magic up their sleeve for the rest of the campaign if they resume it.
Yeah. Well, Thomas, that is our first show for our new show, Snooze. I guess if people want to follow you, go ahead and tell them where they can do that.
Yeah, you can follow me on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at Texan 8th Gen. I'm trying to build up my social media following this year, and I think this is a great time for me to say that, hey, definitely give me a follow on all those accounts, and thinking of some ideas, obviously, along with this show to kind of continue my media brand individually. So definitely continue to like my stuff, follow my stuff, and tell your friends and family that that they need to do the same, because I know both you and I are trying to continue to push in our careers, and I would love to get y'all on board in terms of following our daily content.
Yeah, definitely. And you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at JoshWack13. And if you're interested, you can go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is Snooze, so S-News. Obviously, you'll see the what it looks like here on the screen. But yeah, if you've enjoyed, go ahead and subscribe and be checking out our show. Goal is to have it out every Monday. So that's the goal as of right now. And Thomas, anything else before we close out the show?
Yeah, definitely excited to be here. Looking forward to all our great discussions ahead, and obviously continuing to work with WAC on a weekly basis.
Well, obviously, Thomas, I'm excited to keep on talking sports with you on a weekly basis. It's something I've enjoyed doing and doing it in this new format now with Snooze. I'm excited for it. But to everyone else out there, stay safe out there. Hopefully we get some more sports back. But until then, don't forget to hit that snooze button.